My name is Hazel Morrison, I'm 26 years old, and I'm standing in my father's office watching him destroy my future with 8 simple words. Skip Brittany's wedding and your tuition gets cut. His face is stone cold as he delivers this ultimatum, completely oblivious to the fact that I'm trying to save my sister from the biggest mistake of her life. See, Derek Walsh, my sister's perfect fiancé, isn't who everyone thinks he is. I've seen him with our cousin Tiffany, and what I witnessed will shatter our family forever. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more family drama stories. Trust me, you won't believe how this wedding disaster unfolds, so let's get started. Growing up in the Morrison household meant living with an unspoken hierarchy that I never quite understood until I got older. My father, Robert Morrison, built his construction empire from nothing, and he ruled our family the same way he ran his business, with an iron fist and very clear favorites. My younger sister Brittany, now 24, had always been Daddy's little princess. She got the brand new car for her 16th birthday while I worked summers to afford a used Honda. She got her college tuition paid in full while I scrambled for scholarships and student loans to fund my law degree. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister. But watching her coast through life on our father's generosity while I fought for every opportunity created a resentment I tried hard to suppress. Mom, Catherine Morrison, played the peacekeeper role perfectly, always smoothing over conflicts with guilt trips disguised as gentle suggestions. Hazel, honey, you know your father works so hard to provide for us. Can't you just try to get along with Brittany? These conversations usually ended with me apologizing for expecting equal treatment. The family dynamics shifted dramatically when Brittany started dating Derek Walsh 2 years ago. Derek appeared to be everything my parents wanted in a son-in-law: charming, successful in real estate, and most importantly, he treated their precious daughter like a queen. He had this way of commanding attention when he walked into a room, flashing that perfect smile and saying exactly what people wanted to hear. My parents ate it up completely. What bothered me from the beginning was how Derek seemed to study our family, learning everyone's weaknesses and desires with surgical precision. He'd bring my father expensive whiskey and discuss business expansion plans. He'd compliment my mother's cooking and offer to help with household projects. With Brittany, he was the devoted boyfriend who surprised her with weekend getaways and jewelry that sparkled as brightly as her eyes when she looked at him. But I noticed things others missed. The way Derek's smile never quite reached his eyes when he thought no one was looking. How he'd steer conversations away from his past or change the subject when anyone asked too many questions about his business dealings. Most unsettling was how he gradually isolated Brittany from her college friends, convincing her they were jealous of their relationship and didn't have her best interests at heart. The wedding planning process became another battlefield in our family's ongoing war of favoritism. Brittany and Mom spent countless hours discussing venues, flowers, and guest lists while systematically excluding me from major decisions. Yet somehow, I was expected to contribute financially as the maid of honor and smile graciously when they presented me with choices I had no say in making. The bridesmaid dress alone cost $400, money I desperately needed for textbooks and living expenses. Our extended family added another layer of complexity to the situation. My Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, had always been competitive about whose children were more successful. Her daughter Tiffany, 25 years old and working as a social media influencer, loved being the center of attention at family gatherings. Tiffany had this way of inserting herself into every conversation, always one-upping whatever achievements anyone else shared. When Brittany announced her engagement, Tiffany immediately started hinting about her own relationship prospects, clearly frustrated that her younger cousin was beating her to the altar. The more time Derek spent around our family, the more uncomfortable I became with his presence. There was something calculated about the way he interacted with everyone, like he was following a script designed to win maximum approval with minimum genuine emotion. During family dinners, he'd ask me about law school with what seemed like genuine interest, but his questions always felt like he was gathering intelligence rather than making conversation. My academic performance became another source of family tension during this period. I was working my way through law school with the dream of eventually helping expand Dad's construction business into commercial real estate development. The irony wasn't lost on me that Derek was already positioning himself as Dad's business advisor despite having no formal construction experience. Every time I tried to contribute ideas based on my legal studies, Derek would smoothly redirect the conversation or subtly undermine my suggestions with comments like, "That's interesting, Hazel, but in the real world things work a little differently." The final straw came during Brittany's birthday party last spring. I watched Derek work the room like a politician, charming everyone with stories and jokes while barely acknowledging his girlfriend's presence unless someone was specifically watching them together. Later that evening, I overheard him on the phone in Dad's study, speaking in hushed tones about handling the Morrison situation and keeping everyone on board until after the wedding. When I confronted him about it, he laughed it off as work stress and made me feel paranoid for questioning his loyalty to our family. The discovery that would change everything happened on a seemingly ordinary Saturday afternoon in June. Our family was hosting the annual summer barbecue, a tradition that brought together relatives, family friends, and business associates for an afternoon of food, drinks, and networking. I was helping Mom prepare side dishes in the kitchen when I realized we needed more ice from the garage freezer. Walking through the backyard toward the detached garage, I heard voices coming from behind the garden shed, a secluded spot hidden from the main party area. Something in the tone made me pause, and what I heard next made my blood run cold. Derek's voice, low and intimate, was saying things to someone that no engaged man should ever say to anyone other than his fiancée. The female voice responding with equal passion belonged unmistakably to my cousin Tiffany. I crept closer, my heart pounding as the reality of what I was witnessing sank in. Through a gap in the wooden fence, I could see them clearly. Derek had Tiffany pressed against the shed wall, their bodies intertwined in an embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The conversation that followed was even more devastating than their physical betrayal. "After the wedding, we'll have access to everything," Derek was saying, his hands tangled in Tiffany's hair. "Robert's already talking about making me a partner in the business. Once I'm legally family, we can start moving money around, setting up our own accounts. Brittany's so trusting, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her." Tiffany giggled in response, a sound that made my stomach turn. "I can't believe how easy this has been. Your little fiancé has no idea what's coming." Poor naive Brittany, so excited about her fairy tale wedding. She has no clue she's marrying a con artist. "Keep playing the supportive cousin role," Derek continued. "After the honeymoon, I'll start creating problems in the marriage. Nothing too obvious at first, just enough to make her dependent on me emotionally. Within a year, she'll be so isolated and confused that she'll do whatever I say. Then we make our move." I backed away slowly, my mind reeling from what I'd just learned. This wasn't just an affair, it was an elaborate long-term scheme to defraud my family. Derek wasn't just cheating on my sister, he was planning to systematically destroy her life while stealing from my father's business. And Tiffany wasn't an innocent victim caught up in a moment of passion, she was an active co-conspirator in what amounted to a criminal conspiracy. The rest of the barbecue passed in a blur as I struggled to process the information. I watched Derek circulate among the guests, accepting congratulations on his upcoming marriage and discussing business opportunities with my father. Meanwhile, Tiffany played her part perfectly, cooing over Brittany's wedding dress photos and offering to help with last-minute planning details. The level of deception was breathtaking. That evening, after the last guests had left, I knew I had to tell Brittany what I'd discovered. I found her in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by wedding magazines and favor samples, glowing with happiness as she planned what she believed would be the most important day of her life. The sight of her innocent excitement made what I had to do even more difficult. "Brittany, we need to talk about Derek," I began, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I saw something today that you need to know about." Her expression immediately shifted from joy to defensiveness. "If this is another one of your jealous rants about my relationship, I don't want to hear it, Hazel. I'm so tired of you trying to poison my happiness." I took a deep breath and explained exactly what I'd witnessed behind the garden shed, providing specific details about the conversation I'd overheard. With each word, Brittany's face grew more closed off, more angry. By the time I finished, she was practically vibrating with rage. "I can't believe you would make up something so disgusting about the man I love," she spat. "This is a new low, even for you. Derek warned me that you might try something like this because you can't stand seeing me happy." "Derek warned you?" "Brittany, listen to yourself. He's manipulating you." But she was already on her feet, pointing toward the door. "Get out of my room. Get out right now. I don't want to hear another word of your lies." The next morning brought an even worse development. Dad summoned me to his home office with the grim expression he usually reserved for firing incompetent employees. Mom stood beside his desk, her arms crossed and her mouth set in a thin line of disapproval. "Sit down, Hazel," Dad commanded. "We need to discuss your behavior yesterday." It quickly became clear that Derek had gotten to them first, spinning the story to make me look like a jealous sister trying to sabotage the wedding. According to his version, I had approached him with inappropriate advances, and when he rejected me, I threatened to destroy his relationship with Brittany out of spite. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we'd been concerned about," Mom added, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Dr. Patterson thinks you might benefit from some professional counseling to work through these feelings of resentment toward your sister." The trap was closing around me with frightening efficiency. Derek had anticipated my discovery and prepared a counter-narrative that painted me as unstable and vindictive. My own family was choosing to believe a man they'd known for 2 years over their daughter who had never given them reason to doubt her honesty. "Here's what's going to happen," Dad continued. "You will attend Brittany's wedding with a smile on your face. You will give a lovely maid of honor speech about how happy you are for the couple. And you will stop this destructive behavior immediately. If you can't do that, if you persist in trying to sabotage your sister's happiness, then I'll reconsider funding your final year of law school." The ultimatum hit me like a physical blow. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made to get through law school, was now being held hostage to force my compliance in what I knew was a disaster in the making. But the worst part was seeing the genuine disappointment in my parents' eyes, knowing that Derek had successfully convinced them I was the problem. Derek's response to my discovery was swift and methodical, revealing a level of planning that chilled me to the bone. Within days of our conversation, a carefully orchestrated campaign began to systematically destroy my credibility and reputation. It started with small things, family members mentioning that Derek seemed concerned about my emotional state, or that Brittany had shared some troubling incidents involving my behavior. The first major blow came in the form of photographs. During a family dinner 2 weeks after the barbecue, Derek casually pulled out his phone and showed my parents several pictures that allegedly proved I had been stalking him. The images showed me in various public places where Derek happened to be: the coffee shop near campus, the grocery store, the bank downtown. What he didn't mention was that these were all places I visited regularly for legitimate reasons, but the timing made it appear I was following him. "I didn't want to worry anyone," Derek said with apparent reluctance, "but this has been going on for weeks. I've tried to handle it discreetly, but Hazel's behavior is becoming increasingly erratic." The photographs were accompanied by screenshots of text messages allegedly from my phone number. The messages were filled with inappropriate declarations of love, threats against Brittany, and increasingly unhinged rants about Derek belonging with me instead of my sister. My protests that I had never sent such messages fell on deaf ears, dismissed as further evidence of my deteriorating mental state. Tiffany played her role perfectly during this phase, appearing at family gatherings with carefully crafted stories about my concerning behavior toward her as well. She claimed I had cornered her at the nail salon, accusing her of trying to steal Derek's attention and threatening to make her pay if she didn't stay away from him. The irony of her accusations would have been laughable if they weren't so effective. "I'm honestly scared of her," Tiffany told my parents with tears in her eyes. "Yesterday she followed me home and sat outside my apartment for hours, just staring at my windows. When I went outside to confront her, she started screaming about how everyone was conspiring against her. The family intervention took place on a Tuesday evening in late July. I arrived at my parents' house expecting a normal dinner and instead found myself facing what felt like a tribunal. Dad, Mom, Brittany, Derek, Aunt Linda, and Tiffany were all seated around the dining room table with expressions of grim concern. "Hazel, sweetie, we're all here because we care about you," Mom began, using the patronizing tone usually reserved for children having tantrums. "We think you're going through something very difficult right now, and we want to help you get the support you need." Derek had prepared for this moment with devastating thoroughness. He presented a timeline of my alleged harassment that stretched back months, complete with dates, locations, and witness statements from people I barely knew. According to his carefully constructed narrative, my obsession with him had been building since he first started dating Brittany, but had escalated dramatically as the wedding approached. "The most concerning incident happened last Friday," Derek said, his voice heavy with what appeared to be genuine worry. "I was leaving the gym when Hazel approached me in the parking lot. She was clearly agitated, talking about how she had proof that I was planning to hurt Brittany, and that she wouldn't let me destroy her family. When I tried to calm her down, she became physically aggressive, grabbing my arm and screaming that I would pay for what I was doing." The description of this fictional encounter was so detailed and believable that for a moment even I questioned my own memory. Derek's ability to fabricate events while maintaining perfect emotional control was genuinely frightening. He presented evidence of a restraining order he was considering filing, along with documentation of a report he'd made to campus security about my erratic behavior affecting my law school performance. Brittany's contribution to the intervention was perhaps the most painful part. My sister, who had once confided in me about everything from high school crushes to career anxieties, looked at me with a mixture of fear and pity that cut deeper than any accusation. "I don't understand what happened to you, Hazel," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "We used to be so close, and now you're trying to destroy the most important relationship in my life." "Derek makes me happy in ways I never thought possible, and instead of celebrating that, you're creating these elaborate fantasies to tear us apart." The intervention concluded with an ultimatum that was somehow even more devastating than Dad's threat about my tuition. The family had collectively decided that I needed professional help, and they had already arranged for me to start seeing Dr. Elizabeth Hansen, a therapist who specialized in what they delicately termed adjustment disorders and family dynamics issues. "This isn't a punishment," Dad insisted. "This is us trying to save our family before your behavior causes irreparable damage. You'll attend weekly sessions with Dr. Hansen, and you'll stay away from Derek unless absolutely necessary for wedding-related activities. Most importantly, you'll stop spreading these harmful stories about his character." The threat to my academic career escalated the following week when I was called to a meeting with Dean Marshall at the law school. Derek had somehow managed to file a formal complaint alleging that I was using my position as a law student to harass him and his fiancée. The complaint included copies of the forged text messages, witness statements from people claiming I had discussed taking legal action against Derek for non-existent crimes, and a psychological evaluation recommending that the school monitor my fitness to practice law. "Miss Morrison, these are very serious allegations," Dean Marshall said, reviewing the thick file Derek had apparently been building for weeks. "Several faculty members have also expressed concerns about changes in your behavior and academic performance this semester. Dr. Williams mentioned that your last paper included some unusual legal theories about stalking and harassment that seemed to reflect personal rather than academic interests. The web of lies was so intricate and well documented that defending myself felt impossible. Every protest I made was dismissed as further evidence of the psychological instability Derek had so carefully established. My academic advisor suggested I consider taking a leave of absence to address these personal issues before they affected my ability to graduate." Meanwhile, the social media campaign against me was gaining momentum. Brittany had started posting cryptic messages about toxic family members who couldn't be happy for others' success. Tiffany shared articles about sibling rivalry and mental health, always with comments about how important it was to protect yourself from negative energy within your own family. Their friends and followers began speculating in the comments about which family member was causing drama, and my name started appearing more frequently as people pieced together the details. The isolation was perhaps Derek's most effective weapon. One by one, family, friends, and relatives began treating me with the careful distance usually reserved for unstable relatives. Conversations would halt when I entered rooms. Invitations to family gatherings became less frequent or came with conditions about my behavior. Even my closest college friends started expressing concern about my fixation on Derek and Brittany's relationship, having been fed carefully selected pieces of Derek's fabricated evidence. The financial destruction of my life began exactly 1 week after the family intervention. I arrived at the university's financial aid office for what I thought was a routine meeting about my final semester's tuition payment schedule, only to discover that my father had officially withdrawn his financial support. The woman behind the desk, Mrs. Rodriguez, handed me a formal letter stating that Robert Morrison was no longer willing to serve as my educational guarantor due to concerning behavioral issues that require professional attention. Without Dad's backing, my student loans were immediately called into question. The bank had approved my original financing based partly on his guarantee and the expectation that his construction business would provide future employment opportunities. Now I found myself scrambling to secure emergency funding for my final year of law school, taking on additional debt with higher interest rates that would burden me for decades. The apartment vandalism happened 3 days later. I returned home from a particularly brutal study session at the library to find my small studio apartment in complete chaos. Books were scattered across the floor, papers were ripped and torn, and my laptop screen was cracked beyond repair. Most disturbing was the message scrawled across my bathroom mirror in red lipstick: "Stop lying or it gets worse." The police officer who responded to my call seemed skeptical from the moment he walked through my door. Officer Thompson took notes with the weary expression of someone who had seen too many domestic disputes and mental health crises disguised as criminal complaints. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked, photographing the damage with obvious reluctance. When I tried to explain about Derek's campaign against me, Officer Thompson's expression shifted to barely concealed irritation. It turned out that Derek had already filed a report claiming I had been making threats against him and his fiancée, and that he was concerned about my mental stability. The vandalism of my own apartment was dismissed as either a coincidence or possibly something I had done to myself during a psychological episode. "Miss Morrison, I understand you're going through a difficult time," Officer Thompson said, closing his notepad without completing a formal report. "But filing false police reports won't solve your problems. I'd suggest focusing on getting the professional help your family is encouraging." The social media destruction reached its peak that same week when Brittany posted a long, emotional Facebook status about dealing with family members who can't accept love and happiness. The post carefully avoided naming me directly but included enough specific details that anyone who knew our family could identify me as the problem. Within hours, the post had dozens of comments from friends and relatives expressing support for Brittany and concern about my concerning behavior. The comments section became a virtual pile-on that destroyed what remained of my reputation within our social circle. High school classmates shared stories about my supposed jealousy issues that I had no memory of. Family friends posted about their own experiences with unstable relatives and offered advice about setting boundaries. Most painfully, several of my law school colleagues commented about changes they had noticed in my behavior and academic performance. Tiffany amplified the campaign by sharing Brittany's post with her own commentary about the importance of protecting yourself from toxic family members, even when cutting them off is painful. Her version was shared dozens more times, spreading the story far beyond our immediate family circle to include her influencer network and their followers. My first real ally emerged from the most unexpected place. Riley Parker had been my study partner in constitutional law during our second year, but we drifted apart as our schedules became more demanding. She appeared at my apartment door on a Thursday evening, carrying Chinese takeout and wearing an expression of grim determination. "I've been watching what's happening to you on social media," Riley said, pushing past me into the destroyed apartment without waiting for an invitation. And I think you're being set up by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Riley's background in psychology gave her insights that I had missed in my emotional turmoil. She pointed out the sophisticated nature of Derek's campaign, noting that the timeline of events and the types of evidence he was presenting suggested someone with experience in manipulation and psychological warfare. "This isn't amateur hour," she explained as we sat among the ruins of my belongings. "Whoever is doing this has either done it before or has studied how to systematically destroy someone's credibility. The fake text messages, the planted evidence, the way he's turned your own family against you, this is textbook narcissistic abuse escalated to criminal levels." Riley helped me begin documenting everything that had happened, creating a timeline that revealed the calculated nature of Derek's attacks. We started photographing evidence, saving screenshots of social media posts, and reaching out to potential witnesses who might have seen things that contradicted Derek's version of events. The second member of my unlikely alliance appeared 2 weeks later. Jake Rodriguez had been Derek's friend and occasional business partner for several years, but cracks in their relationship had been showing for months. Jake found me at the coffee shop where I'd been studying since my laptop was destroyed, looking nervous and checking over his shoulder before approaching my table. "I need to tell you something about Derek," Jake said, sliding into the seat across from me. "And if he finds out I talked to you, my life is going to become very complicated very quickly." What Jake revealed over the next hour changed everything I thought I knew about Derek Walsh and his plans for my family. Derek's real estate business was largely fictional, a sophisticated front for a much darker operation that involved identity theft, mortgage fraud, and what Jake described as romance scams taken to the next level. "You're not his first target," Jake explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "There was a woman in Phoenix 2 years ago, another one in Denver before that. He studies wealthy families with vulnerable dynamics, finds the weak spots, and exploits them for everything he can get." Derek's pattern was always the same. He would identify families where there was existing tension between siblings or between parents and children. He'd romance the favored child while systematically destroying the credibility of anyone who might pose a threat to his plans. Once he gained access to family finances through marriage or business partnerships, he would begin moving money into accounts he controlled while creating situations that would prevent his victims from seeking help. "The woman in Phoenix killed herself," Jake continued, his face pale with the weight of what he was sharing. "Her family blamed her for trying to destroy their daughter's marriage, and when Derek finished cleaning out their accounts, she couldn't handle the guilt and isolation. He walked away with over $2 million and a dead woman on his conscience." Jake's decision to come forward wasn't entirely altruistic. Derek had recently approached him about helping to set up offshore accounts and shell companies that would be used to launder money stolen from my father's business. When Jake expressed reluctance, Derek made it clear that refusing to cooperate would result in Jake being framed for crimes Derek had already committed. "He's planning something big for right after the wedding," Jake warned. "Once he's legally part of your family, he's going to move fast. Your sister will sign papers she doesn't understand, your father will transfer assets based on Derek's advice, and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, the money will be gone and Derek will have disappeared." The revelation of Derek's criminal history explained so much about his behavior and the sophisticated nature of his attacks against me. This wasn't personal vindictiveness, it was professional elimination of a threat to a multi-million-dollar con game. Understanding this gave me the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in weeks, because it meant there was evidence out there that could expose him. Riley, Jake, and I began meeting secretly to plan our counterattack. We divided responsibilities based on our unique skills and access to information. Riley would use her psychology background to document Derek's manipulation techniques and build a profile that established his pattern of behavior. Jake would gather evidence from Derek's business operations and try to identify his other victims. I would use my legal training to build a case that could be presented both to law enforcement and to my family. The transformation I underwent during this period was perhaps the most important part of my story. I had always been the good daughter who followed rules and trusted that honesty and hard work would be rewarded. Derek's attacks forced me to develop skills I never thought I would need: the ability to gather intelligence, to think strategically about human psychology, and when necessary, to fight dirty against someone who had no moral constraints. The investigation we launched into Derek's background was methodical and comprehensive. Riley used her connections in the psychology department to access databases of case studies involving romance scams and financial fraud. Jake provided insider information about Derek's business operations and introduced us to 3 other people who had been asked to participate in questionable financial transactions. I applied every research skill I'd learned in law school to build a case that could withstand scrutiny from both legal authorities and my skeptical family. Our first breakthrough came when Riley discovered that Derek's real estate license had been suspended in Arizona 2 years earlier following an investigation into mortgage fraud. The suspension was temporary and relatively minor, but it provided a paper trail that contradicted Derek's claims about his business success and clean record. More importantly, it led us to contact information for investigators who had worked on the original case. Detective Sarah Chen from the Phoenix Police Department's white-collar crime unit was initially reluctant to discuss details about a closed case. However, when I explained the situation developing in my family and provided evidence of Derek's current activities, her tone changed dramatically. Derek Walsh is someone we've been hoping would surface again, Detective Chen told me during a phone call that I recorded with her permission. The case we closed was just the tip of the iceberg. We suspected he was involved in a much larger operation, but he disappeared before we could build a comprehensive case. The family Derek had targeted in Phoenix matched our situation with terrifying precision. The Hendersons had 2 daughters with a strained relationship, parents who showed clear favoritism toward the younger child, and a successful family business that had been built over generations. Derek had romanced the favored daughter while systematically destroying the older sister's credibility through a campaign nearly identical to what he was doing to me. Jennifer Henderson tried to warn her family about Derek for months, Detective Chen continued. By the time they realized she was telling the truth, he had already transferred most of their liquid assets to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Jennifer couldn't handle the guilt and the isolation. She started drinking heavily, and one night she drove her car into a bridge abutment at 90 miles per hour. The parallels to my situation were so exact that it felt like Derek was following a detailed playbook. Even some of the specific lies he had told about me appeared to be recycled versions of accusations he had made against Jennifer Henderson. The forged text messages, the manufactured evidence of stalking, the carefully orchestrated family intervention, it was all part of a proven system for neutralizing threats to his operation. Jake's investigation into Derek's current business dealings revealed the scope of what Derek was planning for our family. Using Derek's computer access while Derek was traveling, Jake discovered files containing detailed financial information about my father's construction company, including bank account numbers, client lists, and information about upcoming commercial projects worth millions of dollars. He's been planning this for over a year, Jake explained during one of our clandestine meetings in Riley's apartment. There are spreadsheets showing how he's going to gradually move money from your family's accounts into shell companies he controls. After the wedding, he's planning to convince your father to invest in several fake development projects. The shell companies Derek had established were sophisticated and nearly impossible to trace. They had legitimate-sounding names like Southwest Commercial Development LLC and Morrison Walsh Construction Partners, designed to look like natural expansions of my father's existing business. Derek had even created fake websites and business addresses to support the illusion of legitimate enterprises. Our counterattack began with careful documentation of Derek's lies and contradictions. Riley helped me create a comprehensive timeline showing how Derek's stories about his background, his business activities, and his relationship with Brittany contained numerous inconsistencies and outright falsehoods. We gathered evidence showing that many of the successful real estate deals Derek claimed credit for either never happened or were handled by other agents. The first strike against Derek was subtle but effective. I used my connections at law school to have Derek's business licenses and certifications verified through official channels. When the inquiries reached Derek's current employer, questions were raised about discrepancies between his resume and his actual qualifications. Within a week, Derek was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into his credentials. Derek's reaction to this initial attack revealed just how carefully he had been monitoring my activities. Within hours of losing his job, Derek confronted Brittany with a new set of evidence allegedly proving that I had been using my law school connections to harass him professionally. He produced emails that appeared to show me coordinating a campaign to destroy his career out of jealousy and spite. "She's escalating because she knows I'm getting closer to exposing her mental illness," Derek told my parents during an emergency family meeting that I wasn't invited to attend. "First she tried to destroy my relationship with Brittany, and now she's trying to destroy my livelihood." This is exactly the kind of behavior that psychologists warn about when discussing obsessive disorders. But Derek's response also contained his first significant mistake. In his rush to counter our attack, he had fabricated emails using information that only someone with access to my law school accounts would have known. Riley recognized this inconsistency and helped me document how Derek could have obtained this information only through illegal means. Tiffany's role in Derek's operation became clearer during this phase as well. Jake discovered that Tiffany had been receiving regular payments from one of Derek's shell companies for what was described as social media consulting services. In reality, she was being paid to maintain her social media campaign against me and to gather intelligence about our family's activities and finances. The pressure on Tiffany intensified when Riley created fake social media profiles and began monitoring Tiffany's online activities. We discovered that Tiffany was not only coordinating with Derek about timing their public attacks against me, but was also sharing private family information that Derek was using to refine his manipulation strategies. Our second major strike targeted Derek's relationship with my father's business contacts. Using information Jake had gathered about Derek's fictional development projects, I prepared detailed financial analyses showing how Derek's proposed investments would actually function as money laundering operations. I sent these analyses anonymously to several of my father's most trusted business partners, including his longtime attorney and accountant. The response was immediate and dramatic. Dad's attorney, Michael Foster, called for an emergency meeting to discuss concerning financial proposals that appeared to be connected to the family. When Dad tried to defend Derek's business acumen, Foster presented evidence showing that several of Derek's supposed partners were either fictitious companies or businesses that were under investigation for fraud in other states. "Robert, I've been handling your family's legal affairs for 20 years, Foster said during a meeting that Jake had coached me to request through back channels. "The investment proposals your future son-in-law has been making would expose you to criminal liability and could result in the loss of everything you've built." Derek's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble, but he was far from defeated. His response to these mounting challenges was to accelerate his timeline and escalate his attacks against me. If he couldn't complete his long-term plan to gradually drain my family's resources, he would grab what he could quickly and disappear before the investigation could expose him completely. The wedding date, still 3 weeks away, became a countdown to either Derek's success or his exposure. Everything we had worked for would come down to whether we could present enough evidence to convince my family before Derek could complete his con and destroy our family's finances. The final phase of our battle was about to begin, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. With 3 weeks remaining until the wedding, Derek's behavior became increasingly desperate and dangerous. The professional setbacks we had engineered were forcing him to move faster than he preferred, and his usual careful planning was being replaced by increasingly reckless attacks. The man who had once been methodically patient was now showing signs of the predatory narcissist lurking beneath his charming facade. My final attempt at a direct conversation with Brittany took place on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at the bridal salon where she was picking up her wedding dress. I had been specifically uninvited to this appointment, but I knew from Mom's careless comments when the appointment was scheduled. When I arrived, Brittany was standing on a platform surrounded by mirrors, looking radiant in the ivory silk gown that had cost more than I spent on rent in 6 months. "Brittany, please, just give me 5 minutes," I pleaded, ignoring the scandalized expressions of the salon staff who had clearly been warned about my unstable behavior. My sister looked at me through the mirror with a mixture of exhaustion and barely controlled anger. "I can't do this anymore, Hazel. I can't keep pretending that your jealousy and mental illness aren't affecting everyone in this family. Derek thinks I should get a restraining order against you, and honestly, I'm starting to agree with him. I tried one last time to present the evidence Riley, Jake, and I had gathered. I showed her the documentation of Derek's suspended real estate license, the connection to the Phoenix family, the evidence of shell companies being set up to steal from Dad's business. But with each piece of evidence I presented, Brittany became more convinced that I had fabricated everything as part of an elaborate delusion. "You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" she said, stepping down from the platform and moving away from me as if I were physically dangerous. "Creating fake documents, making up stories about Phoenix, probably paying this Jake person to lie for you. The level of effort you've put into destroying my happiness is actually frightening." The conversation ended with Brittany threatening to call security if I didn't leave immediately. As I walked out of the salon, I realized that Derek's psychological manipulation had been even more complete than I had understood. He hadn't just convinced my family that I was lying. He had convinced them that I was capable of elaborate criminal fraud to support my lies. Derek's final gambit came 2 days later in the form of a coordinated attack that nearly succeeded in having me arrested. I was leaving the law library after a late-night study session when I found Derek waiting by my car, his face bruised and his shirt torn. Before I could react, he began shouting for help, claiming that I had attacked him in the parking garage. "She's completely lost it," Derek yelled, loud enough to attract the attention of several other students and a campus security guard. "She followed me here and attacked me when I tried to get away from her." The security guard who responded was Officer Martinez, a man I had interacted with several times during my years at the law school. His initial inclination was to believe Derek's story, especially when Derek produced his phone showing text messages allegedly from my number threatening violence if he didn't confess the truth about Phoenix. "Miss Morrison, I'm going to need you to come with me while we sort this out," Officer Martinez said, his hand resting on his radio as if preparing to call for backup. It was Jake's intervention that saved me from arrest. He had been following Derek that evening as part of our surveillance operation and had witnessed the entire staged incident from his car. Jake emerged from the shadows with his phone in hand, showing Officer Martinez video footage of Derek punching himself in the face and tearing his own shirt before approaching my car. "This man has been systematically harassing Miss Morrison for months," Jake told Officer Martinez, providing a brief summary of Derek's criminal background. "What you just witnessed was attempted filing of a false police report, and I have video evidence of him staging the entire incident." Derek's reaction to being caught was perhaps more revealing than anything else he had done. Instead of embarrassment or attempts to explain away his behavior, he flew into a rage that showed his true personality. He screamed at Jake about betraying their business relationship and threatened both of us with lawsuits, criminal charges, and violence. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Derek snarled, his carefully maintained facade completely gone. "I've destroyed people stronger than both of you, and I will burn your entire family to the ground before I let some jealous law student ruin what I built." Officer Martinez's report about the incident was detailed and damning, but it also created new problems for our investigation. Derek now knew that Jake was actively working against him, which meant that Jake's access to insider information about Derek's plans would be cut off. More importantly, Derek's mask had slipped completely, and we could expect his final attacks to be much more dangerous. The evidence compilation was completed during this crucial week. Riley had assembled a psychological profile showing Derek's pattern of targeting families with specific vulnerabilities. Jake had provided financial documentation proving Derek's intent to defraud my father's business. I had built a legal case file that would be sufficient to obtain warrants for Derek's arrest once law enforcement was willing to take action. But we also discovered the existence of Derek's other victims, and the pattern was even more disturbing than we had initially understood. Riley's research had identified 5 families over the past 7 years who had been targeted by Derek using essentially the same methods. In 3 cases, Derek had successfully stolen substantial amounts of money before disappearing. In one case, the targeted family member had been driven to suicide before Derek could complete his scheme. In another case, Derek had been exposed but had managed to avoid prosecution by disappearing across state lines. The most disturbing discovery was that Derek had a partner in his criminal enterprise. The woman who appeared in some of the Phoenix police reports as Amanda Richardson was actually Tiffany using a false identity. Tiffany wasn't just my cousin who had been seduced into helping with Derek's scheme, she was an experienced criminal who had helped target multiple families for financial fraud. This revelation explained the sophisticated nature of Derek's attacks against me and the level of inside information he had about our family dynamics. Tiffany had been studying our family for years, preparing for the moment when Derek would approach Brittany and begin the process of gaining access to my father's business empire. The final week before the wedding brought escalating attacks that targeted every aspect of my life. Derek filed formal complaints with the State Bar Association alleging that I had used my law school position to harass him and his business associates. He contacted my professors with concerns about my fitness to practice law. He even reached out to the law firm where I had been promised a position after graduation, sharing his fabricated evidence of my supposed psychological instability. Meanwhile, Tiffany escalated her social media campaign, publishing blog posts about protecting families from dangerous relatives and sharing detailed accounts of my alleged threatening behavior. The posts were carefully crafted to avoid specific false claims that could constitute defamation, while creating the clear impression that I was mentally ill and potentially violent. My father's business faced its own crisis during this period as Derek's criminal associates began targeting Morrison Construction's financial accounts. Someone with inside knowledge of the company's banking procedures attempted to transfer $50,000 to an overseas account. The transfer was caught by the bank's fraud detection system, but it demonstrated that Derek's timeline had accelerated to the point where he was willing to commit obvious crimes rather than wait for his long-term plan to unfold. The wedding rehearsal took place on Friday evening at the country club where my parents had been members for over 20 years. I was not invited to attend, but Riley and Jake positioned themselves in the parking lot to observe who was present and to document Derek's behavior. What they witnessed was Derek meeting privately with several men who appeared to be coordinating plans for something that would happen after the wedding ceremony. It looked like a criminal planning session, Riley told me later that evening. Derek was showing them floor plans of what looked like your parents' house, and they were discussing timing and logistics like they were planning a robbery. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, my parents' housekeeper for over 15 years, approached me at the grocery store with information she felt she had to share. She had overheard Derek and Tiffany discussing plans to search my father's home office for financial documents and computer passwords while the family was distracted by wedding festivities. "I don't usually get involved in family business," Mrs. Patterson said nervously, "but something about those two has never felt right to me. The way they look at your family's belongings like they're already planning how to spend the money, it makes my skin crawl." Everything was now in place for the confrontation that would either save my family or destroy what remained of my relationship with them forever. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, and Derek's criminal plans would begin immediately afterward. If I couldn't convince my family of the truth before Derek gained legal access to their resources, everything my father had built over his lifetime would be lost, and Brittany's life would be destroyed in ways she couldn't even imagine. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect weather that seemed to mock the disaster I knew was about to unfold. I stood in my small apartment, staring at the maid of honor dress hanging in my closet, a symbol of the role I was supposed to play in what I now understood was an elaborate criminal conspiracy disguised as a family celebration. The original plan Riley, Jake, and I had developed called for presenting our evidence to law enforcement before the ceremony began. However, Detective Chen had informed us that the Phoenix Police Department couldn't take action in our jurisdiction without cooperation from local authorities, and the Sheriff's Department had been dismissive of our claims about a sophisticated romance scam. Without Derek being caught in the act of committing a crime, our evidence was considered circumstantial and insufficient for immediate arrests. "You need to understand," Deputy Williams had told me during our final meeting with local law enforcement, "that most of what you're describing sounds like family drama and business disputes. Until someone actually steals money or commits a verifiable crime in our jurisdiction, our hands are tied. This meant that our only option was to confront Derek publicly at the wedding, presenting our evidence in front of the assembled family and guests in hopes that the weight of testimony from multiple witnesses would finally break through the psychological manipulation Derek had established. It was a desperate strategy that could easily backfire, but we were out of time and alternatives. Riley and Jake positioned themselves among the guests, using their phones to record everything that was about to happen. We had learned from Derek's own tactics that documentation would be crucial, both for potential legal proceedings and for protecting ourselves against whatever counterattacks Derek might launch. The Country Hills Golf Club was decorated with the kind of understated elegance that my mother favored. White roses, soft lighting, and enough subtle luxury to impress the family's business associates and social connections. As I arrived, I could see Brittany through the bridal suite windows, radiant in her wedding gown and surrounded by bridesmaids who had been carefully selected for their loyalty to Derek's version of recent events. The ceremony itself was scheduled to begin at 4 o'clock, with cocktails and dinner to follow. Derek's criminal associates were scattered throughout the guest list, disguised as business contacts and college friends. Mrs. Patterson had provided me with descriptions of several men she had seen meeting with Derek, and I could identify at least 4 of them among the assembled guests. I waited until the ceremony had begun and all attention was focused on the altar before making my move. Derek stood at the front of the chapel looking every inch the perfect groom. Handsome, confident, and completely believable in his role as the loving fiancé. Brittany approached down the aisle with tears of joy in her eyes, trusting completely in the man who was planning to destroy her life within hours of their legal marriage. "Before this ceremony continues," I said, standing up in the 3rd row as the officiant asked if anyone had objections to the union, "there are things this family needs to know about Derek Walsh and his plans for our future." The gasp that rippled through the assembled guests was audible even over the string quartet that had stopped playing abruptly. Brittany froze halfway down the aisle, her bouquet trembling in her hands as she processed what was happening. Derek's expression shifted from surprise to calculation to barely controlled rage in the space of seconds. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, pulling out the folder of evidence Riley and I had prepared, "the man my sister is about to marry is not who any of you think he is. His name is Derek Walsh, and he is a professional con artist who has targeted our family as part of a criminal conspiracy to steal everything my father has built." The chaos that followed was immediate and intense. Dad started moving toward me with the obvious intention of physically removing me from the venue. Mom began crying and apologizing to the guests. Brittany screamed at me to stop ruining her wedding. But Derek's reaction was the most telling. Instead of defending himself or demanding proof, he immediately began signaling to his associates scattered throughout the crowd. "Derek Walsh's real estate license was suspended in Arizona for mortgage fraud," I announced, speaking quickly before anyone could stop me. "He has targeted at least 5 families over the past 7 years using identical methods. One of his previous victims, Jennifer Henderson, was driven to suicide after Derek destroyed her credibility and stole her family's money." Jake stepped forward at this point, identifying himself and providing corroboration for everything I was saying. "I have been working with Derek for 2 years, and I have documentation of shell companies he has established to launder money stolen from the Morrison family business. He planned to begin transferring assets immediately after this wedding." The moment when everything changed came when Tiffany panicked. Seeing that the conspiracy was being exposed and fearing that she would be implicated in Derek's crimes, she made a desperate attempt to distance herself from him by confessing her role in front of the entire assembled family. "I didn't want to do it," Tiffany screamed, pushing through the crowd toward the altar. "Derek made me help him. He said if I didn't cooperate, he would frame me for things I never did. I'm sorry, Brittany, but he's been using both of us." The confession that poured out of Tiffany over the next few minutes was more damaging than anything Riley, Jake, or I could have presented. She admitted to being paid for her role in the conspiracy, to helping Derek study our family's vulnerabilities, to fabricating evidence against me, and to planning to help Derek access my father's financial accounts after the wedding. The whole thing was planned from the beginning, Tiffany sobbed, makeup streaming down her face as she fell to her knees in front of the altar. Derek chose Brittany because she was the favored daughter, and he planned to destroy Hazel's credibility so no one would believe her when she tried to warn you. I've been helping him for over a year, and I can't do it anymore. Derek's response to this complete collapse of his operation was to drop all pretense and reveal the violent criminal underneath his charming facade. Instead of trying to deny the accusations or maintain his innocent act, he grabbed Brittany by the arm and began dragging her toward a side exit while screaming threats at everyone in the chapel. "You have no idea what you've done," Derek snarled, his grip on Brittany's arm tight enough to leave bruises. "This family owes me everything they're about to lose, and I will take every penny one way or another." The physical altercation that followed was brief but terrifying. Derek struck my father when Dad tried to intervene, then pulled out a knife and threatened to hurt Brittany if anyone tried to stop him from leaving. It was Jake who ended the confrontation by tackling Derek from behind, allowing Brittany to escape while several male guests restrained Derek until police could arrive. The knife Derek had been carrying was later found to contain traces of a sedative that he had apparently planned to use to incapacitate anyone who interfered with his post-wedding criminal activities. In Derek's car, police discovered detailed floor plans of my parents' house, schedules of family activities, and equipment that suggested he had been planning a home invasion robbery as his backup plan if the financial fraud was detected. The arrests that followed included not only Derek but also 3 of his associates who were found with weapons, burglary tools, and false identification documents. Tiffany was taken into custody as well, though her cooperation with the investigation and her public confession at the wedding would later result in a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against Derek. The wedding reception area became a crime scene as federal agents arrived to investigate the interstate nature of Derek's criminal enterprise. The guests who had come to celebrate a marriage instead found themselves being interviewed by FBI agents about their knowledge of Derek's activities and their potential victimization by his associates. The revelation that Derek had been planning to rob my family's home that very evening if the financial scheme failed was particularly shocking to my parents. Mrs. Patterson provided police with copies of keys Derek had made to various parts of the house, and security camera footage showed him casing the property on multiple occasions while the family was away. The criminal investigation that followed Derek's arrest revealed the full scope of his operation and its devastating impact on multiple families across 7 states. Federal agents discovered that Derek's criminal enterprise had stolen over $12 million from previous victims, using sophisticated money laundering networks and identity theft schemes that had allowed him to operate undetected for nearly a decade. The evidence Jake, Riley, and I had gathered proved crucial to the federal case being built against Derek and his network of associates. Our documentation of Derek's methods, combined with testimony from his other victims, established a clear pattern of criminal behavior that made prosecution straightforward. Derek's own reaction at the wedding, caught on multiple phones and security cameras, provided undeniable proof of his true character and violent intentions. Brittany's recovery from the psychological manipulation she had endured was a slow and painful process that required professional counseling and strong family support. The depth of Derek's control over her thinking became clear during therapy sessions where she struggled to distinguish between her own feelings and beliefs and the false reality Derek had constructed around her. "I can't trust my own memories anymore," Brittany told me during one of our first honest conversations after the wedding disaster. "Derek convinced me that you were mentally ill, that you were dangerous, that everything you said was a lie created by jealousy. But he also convinced me that his love was the only real thing in my life, that my family would never understand our connection, that I needed to choose between him and everyone else who cared about me." The family therapy sessions Dr. Helen Rodriguez conducted with all of us revealed dysfunction patterns that had made our family vulnerable to Derek's manipulation in the first place. Dad's favoritism toward Brittany, Mom's conflict avoidance, and the competition between Brittany and me had created exactly the kind of environment that professional con artists look for when selecting targets. Predators like Derek study families for months before making their move, Dr. Rodriguez explained during one particularly difficult session. They identify existing tensions and insecurities, then exploit them to create division and control. The Morrison family's dynamics gave Derek multiple pressure points he could manipulate to achieve his goals. Dad's business underwent a complete financial audit to determine how much damage Derek had been able to inflict before being stopped. The investigation revealed that Derek had managed to steal nearly $200,000 through various schemes, including fake subcontractor payments, fraudulent equipment purchases, and unauthorized transfers to accounts he controlled. The money was eventually recovered through the federal investigation, but the damage to business relationships and Dad's reputation took much longer to repair. The changes in my father were perhaps the most surprising aspect of our family's recovery process. The man who had always been quick to make judgments and slow to admit mistakes underwent what could only be described as a complete personality transformation as he grappled with how completely he had been fooled by Derek. "I spent my whole life believing I was a good judge of character," Dad told me during one of our private conversations 6 months after the wedding. "I built my business by trusting the right people and avoiding the wrong ones. Finding out that I not only trusted a criminal but turned against my own daughter to protect him has forced me to question everything I thought I knew about myself." The legal consequences for Derek and his associates were severe and far-reaching. Derek himself received a 30-year federal prison sentence after being convicted on charges including fraud, identity theft, racketeering, and conspiracy. His other victims testified during the sentencing hearing about the devastating impact his crimes had had on their families, providing the judge with a clear picture of the human cost of Derek's criminal career. Tiffany's cooperation with the investigation resulted in a 5-year sentence with the possibility of early release for good behavior. Her testimony revealed details about Derek's operation that helped federal agents identify and arrest several other members of his criminal network. Despite her cooperation, the damage to our family's relationship with Aunt Linda and that side of our extended family proved to be permanent and irreversible. The civil lawsuits that followed the criminal proceedings resulted in significant financial recovery for our family and Derek's other victims. Derek's assets, including properties in multiple states and offshore accounts, were seized and distributed among the people he had defrauded. However, the legal process took nearly 3 years to complete, and many victims received only partial compensation for their losses. My academic and professional recovery happened more quickly than expected, thanks largely to the publicity surrounding the case and the recognition that my actions had prevented a major crime. The law firm that had withdrawn their job offer after Derek's accusations contacted me to apologize and offered me a position with their white-collar crime division. Dean Marshall also apologized for doubting me and provided strong recommendations that helped me secure a clerkship with a federal judge who specialized in financial crime cases. The relationship between Brittany and me evolved slowly from the antagonism Derek had fostered to something stronger and more honest than we had ever shared before. Her experience with Derek's manipulation gave her insights into psychological abuse that made her a powerful advocate for other victims. She eventually became a volunteer counselor with organizations that help survivors of domestic violence and financial fraud. "I understand now why you fought so hard to save me from Derek," Brittany said during a conversation we had on the first anniversary of the wedding that never happened. "At the time, his control over my thinking was so complete that I literally couldn't process information that contradicted what he wanted me to believe. You risked everything to protect me from something I couldn't even see coming." The ongoing investigation into Derek's criminal network led to arrests in 6 states and the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen assets. The methods Derek had used to manipulate families were so sophisticated that federal agents asked Riley to consult on training programs for law enforcement personnel who investigate similar crimes. Her psychological profile of Derek became a model for understanding how predators target and destroy family relationships. Jake's cooperation with the investigation earned him immunity from prosecution for his peripheral involvement in Derek's business operations. He used his experience to start a consulting business that helps families and small businesses identify and protect themselves against sophisticated fraud schemes. His relationship with Riley, which began during our collaboration against Derek, developed into a marriage that proved some good could come from even the darkest situations. The healing process for our family was ongoing and imperfect, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs that reflected the complex nature of repairing relationships damaged by manipulation and betrayal. Dr. Rodriguez continued to work with us as a family, helping us develop healthier communication patterns and more equitable treatment of each family member's needs and perspectives. 2 years have passed since the wedding that never happened, and the Morrison family that exists today is fundamentally different from the one Derek Walsh targeted for destruction. The healing process has been neither quick nor easy, but it has been genuine in ways our previous family dynamics never allowed. We've learned to recognize the warning signs of manipulation, to communicate honestly about our feelings and fears, and to support each other through difficulties instead of competing for favoritism and approval. Brittany's transformation has been the most remarkable aspect of our family's recovery. The confident, independent woman who emerged from therapy bears little resemblance to the isolated, dependent person Derek had systematically created. She completed her college degree, started her own business helping other fraud victims navigate the legal system, and developed the kind of inner strength that makes her immune to future manipulation attempts. Derek taught me that I was nothing without him, Brittany reflected during a recent family dinner. He convinced me that my family didn't really love me, that my friends were jealous of our relationship, that I couldn't trust my own judgment about anything important. Recovery meant learning to trust myself again and recognizing that real love builds you up instead of tearing you down. My relationship with Dad underwent the most dramatic change of all. The man who had once threatened to cut my tuition for opposing Derek's wedding now seeks my advice on business decisions and legal matters. He's developed a genuine respect for my judgment and professional skills that was never present during our earlier relationship. More importantly, he's learned to recognize his own capacity for error and the importance of listening to all perspectives before making important decisions. I raised you to be strong and independent, Dad told me recently, but then I punished you for using those qualities to protect our family. It took almost losing everything to help me understand that strength isn't just about being right, it's about being willing to admit when you're wrong and to change your behavior accordingly. Mom's growth has been quieter but equally significant. She's developed the ability to express disagreement with Dad's decisions and to advocate for fair treatment of both daughters. The woman who once smoothed over every conflict now insists on addressing problems directly and honestly, even when those conversations are uncomfortable or difficult. The legal career I'd feared Derek had destroyed has flourished in ways I never expected. My work on financial fraud cases, informed by personal experience with sophisticated manipulation tactics, has helped dozens of families recover from similar crimes. The federal clerkship led to a position with the Department of Justice's Organized Crime Division, where I specialize in cases involving family-targeted fraud schemes. The relationship that developed between Jake and me during our collaboration against Derek has grown into something stable and supportive in ways I never experienced before. Having seen each other during a genuine crisis, we built our connection on mutual respect and shared values rather than surface attraction or convenience. Jake's decision to risk everything to help expose Derek showed me what real integrity looks like in action. We know each other's courage and character in ways most couples never get to experience, Jake often says when people ask about our relationship's foundation. It's hard to have trust issues when you've already seen someone do the right thing when the cost was genuinely dangerous. Riley's friendship proved to be one of the most valuable relationships that emerged from the entire experience. Her willingness to help me when I had nowhere else to turn, combined with her psychological insights that made our investigation possible, demonstrated the kind of loyalty that lasts a lifetime. Her work studying family manipulation tactics has led to academic publications and consulting opportunities that have advanced both her career and the broader understanding of domestic fraud crimes. The extended family relationships damaged by Derek's conspiracy have had mixed outcomes. Aunt Linda's refusal to accept Tiffany's responsibility for her crimes created a permanent rift that affects holiday gatherings and family celebrations. However, several other relatives who had believed Derek's lies about my mental state have apologized and worked to rebuild their relationships with me and my immediate family. Tiffany's early release from prison after 3 years created new challenges that we're still learning to navigate. Her genuine remorse and cooperation with ongoing investigations against other members of Derek's criminal network demonstrate real change, but the trust she destroyed may never be fully repaired. Family gatherings remain awkward when she's present, but we're learning to focus on moving forward rather than relitigating past betrayals. The business Dad built over his lifetime emerged from Derek's attack stronger and more secure than ever. The financial audits and security improvements implemented after Derek's arrest protect against future fraud attempts. More importantly, Dad's newfound willingness to seek input from family members and professional advisors has improved decision-making and reduced the isolation that made him vulnerable to Derek's manipulation. The ongoing federal investigation continues to uncover new victims of Derek's criminal network and similar operations targeting American families. My testimony has been used in trials across multiple states, and the case study of our family's experience is now taught in law enforcement training programs. Knowing that our experience is helping protect other families provides meaning to what was originally just survival. The psychological scars left by Derek's manipulation campaign have healed slowly and with professional help. Dr. Rodriguez continues to see me occasionally to help process the long-term effects of being systematically gaslighted by people I trusted. The experience taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation tactics, but it also left me more cautious about trusting new people and relationships. Looking back on the entire experience now, I can see patterns and warning signs that weren't visible while we were living through Derek's manipulation. His charm offensive was too perfect, his integration into our family happened too quickly, and his knowledge of our vulnerabilities was too comprehensive to be coincidental. Understanding these patterns helps me recognize similar tactics when I encounter them professionally, but it also makes me grateful for the hard-won wisdom that came from surviving such a sophisticated attack. The question I'm asked most often by other fraud victims is whether I regret fighting Derek's conspiracy instead of simply accepting my family's decision to exclude me from their lives. The answer is always the same: protecting the people you love sometimes requires risking the relationships you value most. The family I have today, built on honesty and mutual respect, is worth infinitely more than the dysfunctional dynamics Derek exploited so successfully. The future holds possibilities that wouldn't have existed if Derek's plan had succeeded. Brittany's business is expanding to help fraud victims in multiple states. Dad's construction company is exploring opportunities for ethical expansion that benefit communities rather than just generating profits. My legal career focuses on protecting families from the kind of predators who destroyed so many lives before Derek was finally stopped. Sometimes I wonder about the path not taken, about what would have happened if I had simply accepted Derek's version of reality and allowed the wedding to proceed. But then I remember Jennifer Henderson, Derek's victim in Phoenix, who couldn't survive the isolation and manipulation Derek used to destroy her credibility. I remember the other families who lost everything because no one was willing to fight for them against a predator who understood exactly how to exploit family dynamics for criminal profit. The lesson I want other families to understand is that love sometimes requires you to be willing to be temporarily hated by the people you're trying to protect. Derek's most powerful weapon was his ability to turn family members against each other, using existing tensions and insecurities to create the isolation he needed to operate freely. Overcoming that manipulation required persistence, courage, and the willingness to risk everything for the truth. What would you do if someone you loved was being manipulated by a predator, and your own family refused to believe your warnings? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and protecting someone from a threat they couldn't see? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please share it with others who might benefit from understanding how sophisticated manipulation works. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family drama and finding strength in the darkest moments. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to give up on someone, even when they've given up on you.